Okay, so in my last video I was talking about a 4-shaft loom versus an 8-shaft loom, the advantages and disadvantages of both. I'm looking, right now I'm renting an 8-shaft loom and wanting to see whether I want to upgrade or do I want to get a table loom. And so in the end, like if you want to get into weaving, it can be an expensive hobby. So if you have the ability of being part of a guild and renting the equipment, I strongly suggest that. The reason being is that it gives you an opportunity to try things out, right? I started off, I was very lucky, a friend of mine was selling her floor loom. I did try a very antique table loom that she had. It needed a bit of work, but just for fun, she said, it's very expensive, let me lend you stuff to try it out, fiddle around with it, which I was so blessed to be able to have that opportunity. I found that I really, really enjoyed it. And even though it was, the loom looked like it was 75 years old or more, I really did enjoy it. And I was considering, like, do I get a rigid heddle loom? Do I get this table loom that she was selling? Or she also had a floor loom that she was selling. And I thought, I didn't want to spend a lot of money at the beginning, because what if I don't like the hobby and, in 6 months from now I'm not using it and all of a sudden now I've got something else stuck in my house. So she had me try her floor loom and I was hooked. I was like, wow. I really, really enjoyed it. But again, obviously it was more expensive, and so I was hemming and hawing because, again, there's advantages and disadvantages to both. So let's go through some of them so that you can make a more informed decision as to what would work best for you. Let's take a look at size. Okay, so size, obviously a table loom is much more compact. Some table looms also have the ability to fold, so that you can actually like store them away in a closet, that sort of thing. You don't necessarily have to keep them out. A floor loom, obviously has a much bigger footprint depending on the size of the floor loom. So my floor loom is 45 inches. It's got quite a heavy footprint. I would say it's probably, about, good almost 5 feet by 5 feet kind of square. So it needs a dedicated space. Now the loom that I have is a Leclerc fanny loom, so it does actually fold a little bit so that it is narrower when I'm not using it, but it's still quite a large footprint, so it's something definitely to consider. The next thing would be cost. Okay, so typically table looms will be more costly, cheaper than floor looms, obviously because of the size. A lot of people you'll find a lot of these looms also secondhand, which is really nice, because the brand new price for a lot of looms, you're looking at, like, for example, a table loom I was looking at, I'm looking at about $1,500 versus, let's say, a floor loom that I would like to get, I'm looking at $3,000-4,000, so brand new. Now, again, you keep your eye on various things. There's various groups on Facebook, for example, that sell equipment for fiber arts and things like that, and I guess I don't know, Kijiji. You keep your eye open. Usually, it's really nice because obviously through the guild, I get word of various things that come for sale as well. So I would obviously look at your local guild or your local group that has to do with weaving. In terms of making samples, that would be the next thing to consider. So they always say that you should make a sample, to see what it is you're going to get, right? If you haven't done something before, this makes complete sense. I don't do that myself very often. It's logical to do this, right? So that you can do a small version, not the complete thing, but a small version to know, okay, what is it going to look like on the loom? When I wash it, how is that going to turn out? Will the fibers work? Will it shrink? To give yourself no surprises at the end. And it is strongly suggested. So to me, I would imagine that doing a sample on a table loom is so much easier than doing it on a floor loom. There's a lot less wastage of thread. Like, for example, as I said, mine is a 5-foot long loom, and so there's going to be a lot of wasted thread for me to only do, maybe, I don't know, 6 inches or, even a foot of a sample, or maybe even not that. Whereas a table loom, obviously the waste will be a lot less. A table loom, compared to my floor loom, it's fairly easy to set up. Like if you want to do just something really small and quick. So again, that might be something to consider, right? Assuming you're gonna do samples, and we should all do samples, but again, I know I don't tend to do that. Basically, I think table looms tend to be, when I've done my research as to what I thought I should get. A lot of times they're suggesting a table loom for people to begin with, right? And I know at the beginning I was looking at a rigid heddle loom. Cost-wise, it was cheaper than, like, let's say a table loom from Leclerc, for example, and so forth. And now I'm talking brand new, of course, not necessarily used. And I was talking to my friend, like, what did she think? And of course, she didn't have a rigid heddle loom. The amount of harnesses on the rigid heddle loom obviously are less than your table loom, right? So you're based on a previous video I talked about, you are more limited in what you can do because of harnesses. Now there are ways that are coming out for rigid heddle loom to be able to do similar things that, let's say, a 4-harness loom could do. And I guess as time goes on and people find more tricks, I think that will also expand. I was worried about outgrowing the rigid heddle loom very quickly, and then being stuck having to try and sell it and to upgrade, right? So I decided I wanted 4 shafts to start with, and so between the table loom and the floor loom that she had, they were both 4 shaft. I actually, as I said, I ended up going with the floor loom, but it gave me lots of opportunities to be able to keep me busy, to try out so many things before I would get bored with it, okay? Now, that's not to say that I'm bored with it now, that I need to get an 8 shaft because I no longer want my 4 shaft loom. I love my 4 shaft loom. There are so many things I can still do with it. But there are a lot of patterns in 8 shaft that always seem to catch my eye for myself, right? Some people may never have any desire to go beyond 4 shaft. I like the versatility of having both myself, okay? Again, assuming that I win the lottery and I can invest in both, or I get a used version of an 8 shaft table loom for a really good price. But I think also the table looms, not only are they like more for beginners in terms of the cost, to lower the cost, but you want to make sure, as I said, you're not going to outgrow it really, really quickly. And if it's something that you're not sure that you want to really get into heavily, you're not somebody who really enjoys doing fiber arts a lot, that might be the safest bet, is to try to go for obviously a cheaper version, and then you could upgrade, but again, you're gonna still have to replace it, get rid of the old one, and to purchase the new one, or whatever it is that you decide. Loom waist. Okay, so again, when you look at loom waist, you're looking at the castle, which has the harnesses in, right? And then there's a part at before the castle where the shed gets too small that you just can't put your shuttle through. Sometimes you can get narrower shuttles that can allow you to go much closer, okay, than let's say a larger shuttle, a wider shuttle. And then there's also going to be basically the back, where the back comes up. There's that apron comes up to a certain extent, and so wherever that apron stops, all the way, to the castle where the harnesses are, to the other side, all of that's going to be waist. And so if you're doing, let's say, something that's 45 inches, let's say, I don't know, that it's 400 yarn threads, whatever that amount of wastage is times that many threads. So it does add up, in the end. So if you can minimize your loom waste, you definitely want to do that. A table loom will obviously have a lot less loom waste compared to obviously a floor loom. But there are many ways that you can minimize a loom waste. As a beginner, I wouldn't really worry about that. Just accept the fact that you're going to have waste. Once you get used to what you're doing and you get good at it, you can realize, okay, I can shave a little here, I can shave a little there. So I wouldn't worry about that immediately, but it is something to consider. Project size. Huge consideration. What do you want to do? I remember my friend saying, well, what do you want to weave? I'm like, I don't know. Like, what can you weave? And so I started to research what are things that you could possibly weave. And because I'd never woven anything, I have no idea if I'd enjoy weaving them or not. I have since then, I've woven dish towels, which I love doing dish towels. I think a lot of people like doing dish towels. I've done scarves, which I really enjoy. I've done blankets. Not so eager to do blankets. I find that the 45-inch width, my arms are short, my little T-Rex arms, to go from one end of the 45-inch loom to the other constantly. I find that I'm rocking back and forth, and I don't have as much fun doing that necessarily. I think that, like, if I started over and restarted, I think I probably would have gone with maybe a 36-inch. But again, when I was doing blankets, I would have to do 2 sets of the 36-inch, sew them in the middle, to make my blanket. But again, it would be easier for me to go from one side to the other. I wouldn't have as many issues. But again, that may not be a problem, for you as well. Obviously, the table looms are not going to be as wide. I think your widest table loom, you're probably looking around 24 inches. They, come in various sizes. I think like around 10 inches. I think 16 inches, 24 inches, something in those ranges, depending on what company you're looking at. Whereas the floor looms, you can go up to quite wide. I mean, you can go wide enough that you actually need it at a guild, whereas 2 people are using the loom, which is not typical. But you can go up to 60 inches easily with an actual floor loom, if not larger, depending on the company you're looking at. Speed is something that may be of interest to you or not. I do this as a hobby. I find it very relaxing. It's great for my mental health because my mind just goes at 150 miles an hour as a teacher. So the amount of focus that's required actually calms my brain. And actually it's funny, maybe I'll do a video maybe in the future, but in World War I, the soldiers who are shell shocked, they call that shell shock back then, obviously today we call it PTSD, they taught them fiber arts like knitting, crocheting, weaving. Also, there were Leclerc looms made for actual soldiers in World War I, because that focus does help calm that mind. So obviously, I'm not really looking at trying to do things really, really quickly. If it's something that you want to down the road sell your things and you want to be able to crank them out and so forth, then that's something definitely to consider. But what I did find, because I ended up renting, as I said, the table loom, which has levers on top, I did find it slower actually to weave on a table loom compared to a floor loom. So if you think about it, you've got a floor loom, it's got treadles. I press the treadles with my feet, I have my arms, and they go back and forth with the shuttle. That is slightly faster, okay, compared to when I was using the table loom, because the table loom has these levers, so I've got to put all the levers in the correct position. Once that's done, okay, I pick up my shuttle, put it through, put down the shuttle, change the levers, pick up the shuttle. So again, it's not a dramatic difference, but you've got like a few seconds for each step more, and of course that takes time, as time goes on. So it is a little bit longer of a process than the floor loom. But again, for a lot of people, if you're doing this as a hobby, that may be, it may not be, it might be a moot point anyways, okay? The next one would be your workspace for your warp. So one thing I noticed is that when I have my floor loom, I've got quite a bit of space between, when you bring in the beater bar down to where the harnesses are, there's quite a large space. So I can weave several inches before I have to actually advance my warp forward, because my shed is getting too small for my shuttle to actually go through. And that shed, remember, is that triangle kind of space where the shuttle goes through with the thread. The table loom, that space is a lot less, okay? So I find that I'm maybe doing like 3 inches, and then that shed is starting to get pretty tight that I need to advance. So I'm advancing constantly, and I do prefer, as I said, I would rather do 8-10 inches of weaving, then advance it than every 3 inches. But again, the table loom is smaller, so that's the reality that you have there. Floor looms can also have a longer warp, and they tend to have a better shed, okay? Especially if you have a sectional. So and you can have a sectional on a table loom, okay? But if you have, just because the back beam that you've got and the apron and all that on a floor loom just allows you to have a much longer warp than is capable to be put onto the actual table loom with with your paper, because everything's smaller obviously on the table loom. So if you want to be doing 16, 20 towels, well, chances are you're not doing that on a table loom. You could probably do that on a floor loom with a sectional, for example, right? So that's something that you need to consider. Are you doing this because you want to crank out a lot of things in one shot, or are you just doing 3-4 towels at a time, and then you're going to change projects and then do a different set of 3 towels or something like that? Shuttle size matters more, I've found, with a table loom. Obviously with my floor loom I can use different types of shuttles. I use a boat shuttle. So it's kind of like pointed at both ends. Mine are wooden. You've got ski shuttles. I mean, there's many different types of shuttles. I'm using my boat shuttles on the actual table loom, and it works. It's just that it is somewhat of a tight fit. It's a tighter fit. So I would definitely want to look at, either, I don't like stick shuttles to use myself, but I can use a stick shuttle because it's flat. But there is also, I've seen something called pencil shuttles. So, and different companies actually have thinner and more slim shuttles to use, which I don't have at this point. So that is a little bit more of an issue with actual table looms that you may want to consider. So let's look at different types of looms that you can look at, because depending on the kind of loom that you have, there are advantages and disadvantages to different types, and I did not know that. The fanny loom that I've got is a counterbalance loom, so that's one of the types. Okay, you've also got jack looms, and you have countermarch looms. Most table looms tend to be jack looms, but again, it depends on the company as well. Okay, so what are some advantages and disadvantages, to each type? Just very clear, I'm not going into a huge amount of depth here. Jack looms work well for balanced weavings as well as unbalanced weavings. So I didn't understand that at the beginning what that meant, but when you have, for example, 4 harnesses, a balanced weave means that each treadle basically has 2 harnesses that it's pulling down, or an even number of harnesses that it's pulling down. Well, when I did a waffle weave, I had some treadles that were pulling down 2 harnesses. I had one that was pulling down 3 harnesses, and I had another one pulling down 1 harness. So that's not balanced, and it changes the shed, the ability of the shed to go through. It's not as easy to push. It's harder to push down. It doesn't feel quite right on my counterbalance loom. Whereas on a jack loom, that would not necessarily be an issue. Okay. Treadling, though, from what I've seen, is that on a jack loom is slightly noisier and harder than if you were using a counterbalance loom. And that's because the tension on the warp cannot be very high. Non-elastic warps, so if you're using things like linen or nylon, they're not recommended for these particular types of looms. If you plan on doing a large amount of fabric weaving, as opposed to, let's say, dishcloth or something like that, a jack loom could actually suit your purposes quite well. Okay? Let's talk about a counterbalance loom, which is the one that I've got. Basically, they're quiet. They have a faster and softer treadling than the jack loom that we just discussed. They allow a high warp tension, and that's important if you want to weave rugs. That is something I definitely want to try in the future. Okay, and elastic warps like wool and cotton, as well as non-elastic warps. The shed is not perfect when weaving unbalanced, as I talked about. That waffle weave was not great. Some of the sheds were really nice, and other sheds were really small. And again, I'm using that with Leclerc. I don't know, how that applies to other companies as well. But I know with Leclerc they have something called a shed regulator that you can add, not to my particular version because mine's such an old loom, but I know the newer Fanny, the Fanny 2, you have the ability to have a shed regulator that that solves that kind of issue. Countermarch looms, Glimacra's, Shacked also, I believe, has countermarch looms. They combine rising and sinking action of the counterbalance loom with the ability of the jack loom. So it's kind of both together. The jack loom to open any shed. So it doesn't matter whether it's balanced or unbalanced, it works. I have never tried a countermarch loom, so I cannot really speak to that. They are quiet, they're supposed to be sturdy, and a lot of highly skilled weavers really enjoy countermarch looms. I know my friend, for example, she upgraded from the counterbalance loom that she sold to me, and she went up to a countermarch loom, and she absolutely loves it. So I hope that gives you a little bit more information on deciding between a table loom and a floor loom, so you can make a more informed decision to start on your weaving adventure, and I hope you have a great day.